Hey everyone, this is Levi from Truth Beauty Comics, and I'm really excited to tell you about my new comic called Open Your Eyes. So, Open Your Eyes is a modern retelling of the Sleeping Beauty fairy tale, and it's appropriate for young adults and up. If you enjoy a lot of the themes and comics we talk about on our podcast, then I think you'll like it. So here's the deal. I've already written and drawn the first issue, but I need to raise money to fund the printing, so I'm doing a Kickstarter campaign. Open Your Eyes is officially launching on Kickstarter on July 14th, and that means we have 30 days to fund the printing of the new issue. If you'd like to support the printing and get your own copy, go to Kickstarter.com and search for Open Your Eyes.
Phoney Bone would like nothing more than to spend time on the farm, pining after Thorn. But his cousin Phoney Bone has bigger ambitions. Phoney abandons the farm and heads to town, scheming to rebuild his riches by any means necessary. But even he might be out of his depth, as sinister forces gather on the edge of the forest, led by a hooded figure, seeking the one who bears the star. Today on Truth, Beauty, Comics.
Welcome to Truth Beauty Comics. I'm Levi, a cartoonist.
And I'm Felix, a guy who likes comics.
And this is the podcast where we look for transcendence in a pulpy medium. Today we'll be talking about Bone, issues 4, 5, and 6, and hopefully closing out the Out of Boneville book by Jeff Smith. And as always, you can look at the show notes on our Patreon, which have some images from the comic we're discussing. So I think this is our most ambitious Bone reading yet, maybe.
3 whole issues.
3 whole issues we're going to try to cover. It seems like whenever we get into Bone, we always have more to talk about than we anticipated. But I think we can actually do it. We've covered a lot of ground here. There's a lot to cover today. It's also been, about 6 weeks since we've last done this, according to our recording schedule.
No break for you guys, but things have been hectic here. So we and we skipped ahead and recorded an episode with a special guest, which you'll hear about at the end of this episode. Yeah, so it's been a while.
Yeah.
Nice to be back.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's always a pleasure to come back to Bone. And I mean, I think, we can dive right in here. I think these are one of the things that I feel like with Bone. I'm kind of I don't know if this is common or not, but with Tolkien, let's say, and Bone reminds me so much of Lord of the Rings, the more I read it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of influence there.
Yeah, but really how Lord of the Rings opens, it's very kind of rural. It feels very small when it starts, and there's only these hints at this, not hints, but it's kind of like the big plot that's driving everything is on the borders, right? But the Fellowship of the Ring starts really in the Shire and feels like, very, very much in keeping with The Hobbit, kind of a small little story, but then it just keeps on getting bigger and bigger, right? But I've always loved how Lord of the Rings opens, because I just love the beginning with the Shire and just how slowly these hooded evil figures, the ring wraiths, start stalking them and showing up in their peaceful little world. And I've always loved how Bone opens too. And I'm kind of wondering if, they feel very similar in that sense where, the stakes for the main characters are very low to begin with here. But there's also, you can tell there's a lot going on behind the scenes that's going to kind of keep things moving forward. But yeah.
My sense. So, I mean, people talk a lot about Jeff Smith, the writer artist extraordinaire of Bone, how he was influenced by a lot of comics, right? Particularly Pogo and Carl Barks's Dot Comics, and then a few others. I think less is made of the literary influences, and part of that is because they take slightly more attention to notice. But right, the Bone characters look like they could just be in a Pogo comic strip and wouldn't seem out of place. But yeah, I think there is a lot of Lord of the Rings. I also sort of in this reading am being slightly more attentive to Moby Dick influences, because I think Moby Dick kind of starts out as just a joke in the background, but it's sort of explicitly brought up a number of times. And in a future volume, there's this one issue that we'll get to, but is very Moby Dicky, and I'm sort of curious about why he chose Moby Dick, right? Because part of it is just it's a great gag, right? That Bone likes this sort of famously long and boring, supposedly, book. But I wonder if there's a bit more there. So I'm kind of like attuned to that this
Yeah.
time. And I wonder particularly I wonder if we're supposed to see Phoney as a bit of an Ahab character, because that's sort of who he plays in this dream sequence later on.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this is
Yeah.
fairly half baked at the moment, maybe quarter baked. It's still batter. It's not even in the oven. But
Yeah.
I'm just sort of wondering if there's a bit more there. Yeah, and I do think the Lord of the Rings. It's sort of fun that we're doing this right now because I'm reading Fellowship of the Ring right now, and there is just this, like, you're talking about the opening of the Shire. It takes so
Yeah.
long before they leave the Shire. It's just this
It really does.
lengthy, and you get to know the Shire, right? There's the whole
Mm-hmm.
prologue that's sort of written as almost an historical document that
Right.
helps you to sort of understand how hobbits live and some of the sort of way that the Shire is governed and the farthings and all these things, and how the mayors are basically in charge of feasts.
Right.
And that, and I do think the sort of first three chapters, really, it's introducing the main characters, and then it's also getting you to kind of fall for the valley a bit.
Yeah.
And it's really in chapter 4 that you start to get a sense, issue 4, that you start to get a sense that larger forces are moving, and that this will become a bit more adventurous, and there will be more sort of confrontation of darkness.
Yeah.
In a way that Lord of the Rings sort of slowly brings you in and helps you start to realize how big this is going to get.
Yeah. 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 It does feel very Fellowship of the Rings, kind of, to me at least, and how he paces it, which I really appreciate. I know some people have a hard time getting into Tolkien because of that, because he really takes his time. It's a complex plot, but I know a lot of people are like, expect a little bit more from the outset. And I think even the films, to some degree, they really rush to the plot much more than Tolkien does. He likes to linger. But man, I've always loved Fellowship of the Ring. That book is
It's funny.
so good to me.
I've never finished reading Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
I'm like the one homeschooled Catholic boy in the world who has not read Lord of the Rings. I have read the Silmarillion. I have read the Hobbit. But like the stuff in the Shire, I'm completely on board for. And then it's once they start to get out and it gets much wider that my reading slows down, and I sort of,
if you make it through the Council of Elrond, you're probably going to finish it. Is kind of the rule that
I've never actually gotten through Council of Elrond. I've never gotten to the Two Towers. But that's where everyone loses this time. I do want to push through and make it happen, because in part just I've come to appreciate Tolkien a lot more in recent years. But anyway, we're getting off topic.
Right.
Bone.
Yeah. Let's talk about, so let's do the summary of the first issue here.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just kind of read through this. So we are on issue 4, King Doc. So this opens with Phoney and Fone Bone on the farm, and Phoney, realizing that there might be money to be made in the village, leaves the farm to launch what we find to be a bookmaking scheme in the village concerning a cow race. Fone and Thorn take a bath. It's an hilarious sequence. And we meet, really significantly, King Doc, who is a giant rat creature, and his boss, the hooded one, for the first time. And apparently they're seeking the one who bears the star. And this all unfolds at a night council, where they decide, they're aware of Phone Bone and his connection, because there's really only 3 bones in the valley running around. So they all decide to attack the farm and kill Phone Bone. We then see Thorn having a dream of herself as a child under attack. She's recollecting being under attack of some kind, and awakens to find that the farm is actually under attack from rat creatures. So those are the events of issue 4, King Doc. And any thoughts on this issue here?
Quite a few.
Phoney is really not meant to be on a farm.
Yeah, he struggles with that. No, I have quite a few. I love the establishing shot on the first page of the farm. Yeah. You see it's like very picturesque, maybe slightly, well, I wouldn't say it's worn down. It's well kept, but it looks like an older farm that's been there for a while. And it sort of opens with Fone yelling at Phoney for having spilled the milk. He says, I can't help it. It's a disgusting way to get milk. Phone, it's how you get milk. There's nothing disgusting about it. It's disgusting that I have to do it. I quit. I really enjoy sort of the back and forth here. The squabbling, I think, is really, really effective. And there's that great gag where Phoney is, talking about how he only has a couple of $1,000 on him, and he pulls it out and realizes that they're getting wrinkled. I just really like that gag. And then you have sort of very cartoony moment where Fone says, I gotta go find Thorn. I promised to help her churn butter today. And there's all these hearts. And I was poking around. There's very little, surprisingly given how popular Bone is, there's very little in terms of substantive analysis of it that I can find. And one person was sort of talking that I found.
You mean the relationship between Thorn and Bone? Kind of the nature of their
about
relationship?
Bone, period, about the comic.
Okay.
Like there's very little kind of substantive stuff about the comic and its history and development and everything. One of them, which I would cite, this was also the one that gave me the sort of insight to be a little more attentive to the Moby Dick influence. I would say the name of the author and blog if I could remember, but now I can't. I feel bad. I'll try to remember to put it in the show notes. But was pointing out that there's almost kind of artistically two different logics that go on over the course of Bone. There's the sort of cartoony one of the Bone cousins, and then there's the real one, right? That there's like they exist like physically in a kind of different way, the Bone cousins do, from everybody else, right? Because the others, the human creature, the human animal, the human characters, there we go, all have a kind of solidity to them. And the way that they interact with the world is very much the way that we interact with the world, in a way that, like, Fone will be physically knocked over by feelings of emotion, by emotional feelings of love and things. That there's just kind of a whole different way of interacting, right? They're sort of cartoony in a way that the rest of the world isn't. And there's a bunch of that at the beginning of this chapter. Yes, I really like all these sort of interactions between Fone and Phoney.
I love these interactions. Like I could read so much of this, and there's actually a whole sequence that it's like a one-off issue. It might have been a promo thing that I think he drew that takes place on this farm, like at this time period when Fone and Phoney are working on this farm. And I don't know if you've ever read this. It's kind of collected in maybe some books. Yeah. It's probably about like a little 8-page extra promo comic that he did, where they find a treasure map, and Phoney, believing that it's like the divine power of capitalism, goes off he thinks he's like fated to have this, to find this treasure. And they have all these adventurers trying to get to it, and they finally do and dig it up, and it's their dirty laundry. And apparently Thorn gave them a map to do the laundry, or something like that.
Oh,
like,
wait, I think Thorn's I have read this many moons ago.
Yeah.
It's really good.
I could read a lot of the interactions between the Bone cousins, and I think Phoney is just kind of, and I've said this before. I don't want to keep repeating myself on this, but I love it's like he just has a knack of picking the just right expressions for the Bone Boys, especially, where, the transitions, their expressions, the way they interact with each other, just always just cracks me up. It's just such a delight to read.
Yeah.
Yeah. So big fan of this. And and definitely Looney Tunes, I would say, kind of rules apply, where,
absolutely.
If they got shot point blank with a shotgun, you kind of feel like they would just get soot on their face. And that would be how it kind of works for the Bones, basically.
Yeah. There's this brief scene in between the two scenes of the Bone cousins fighting with Grandma Ben, and we're introduced to, so Grandma Ben's working, right? Grandma Ben, very no nonsense, hardworking, stiff upper lip type. She just drops the laundry. She's saying she's got a tight schedule. And you see these sort of bubbles appear around her head, and she says, "Oh, it's not that, it's the gitchy feeling. It just come at me out of the blue." Says, "The gitchy feeling? What's that?" "The gitchy. It's a terrible feeling. It makes your head swim and your legs wobble. It's a powerful omen of bad things to come." This is such a sort of strange and kind of intriguing moment, especially for a kid reading it. That there
Yeah.
is this kind of right, because there are people whose knees hurt when it's about to rain and everything because the changes in barometric pressure or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But this, there's something that feels like a little
It's a
bit spooky.
premonition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it starts to kind of plant the seeds that the story is going to have a kind of mystical element in a way that there's not been a lot of so far. So even though that's small, I wanted to kind of point that out.
Yeah. We find we kind of go back to the interactions between Phoney and Fone, and we find that Phoney nailed Grandma Ben's bloomers to the wall or to the side of the barn because he made a hole in the wall, and those are the biggest things he could find to cover it up. Very, very keeping in character with the level of thoughtfulness that Phoney has. They have a hilarious exchange, kind of recounting some of his past poor decisions. The time he tried to build
that bit. Yeah,
an orphanage on a hazardous waste landfill.
Yeah, I love hearing the bits and pieces about this, right? You were the richest bone in Boneville, and it was your money-grubbing schemes that got us into this mess, remember? Do you have to keep bringing that up? So I got us run out of Boneville, and a lynch mob chased us for 2 weeks. Geez, one little mistake, and I gotta hear about it the rest of my life. Maybe you'll think twice next time before you build an orphanage on a hazardous waste landfill. What is wrong with that? It's 2 community services rolled into one. It was the ultimate tax shelter. I love hearing these sort of little bits and pieces. And then there's I should have stuck to my first idea. And he said, what, combining a slaughterhouse with a petting zoo? Yeah, that was brilliant. We just get these little like momentary glimpses into Phoney's kind of ridiculous past schemes. And they're so great. And it's like, this is one of those moments where show don't tell is wrong, where just a little bit of telling, particularly for comedic effect, works so well, so much better than if you were actually depicting it.
This reminds me actually a lot of the noodle incident in Calvin, which is Calvin and Hobbes, where it's something that's like always referred to, but you never get you never see it. You never really know what happened, you know, but it's kind of like, it's something Calvin doesn't want brought up, and everyone's like, remember the noodle incident?
Yeah. It's a really good comparison, right? Where like there's something much. I remember as a kid, the noodle incident just sort of filled my imagination, and sometimes I think also in a more sort of sci-fi way, like this is something that Doctor Who did really well about the Time War, which was the sort of massive event in Doctor Who. That happens basically entirely off screen. And the first few years after it came back in the 2000s, there would be these sort of momentary references to, like the Nightmare Child and the armies of Neverwhers and what that like just is. There are these really evocative phrases, and you don't get to see it, right? Because if you saw like no TV budget, especially sort of the relatively small budget of a Doctor Who, could show anything like it, and it would need to be such an intricate sort of sci-fi writing that would take years and years to figure out, right? Whereas these little moments just kind of pull in, right? So it works sometimes not just for comedy, but also for sort of dramatic purposes. The next scene for me is like the only wrong foot in the whole 1,000+ page comic. Like the sort of 2-page comic bath scene is just so weird, I think.
Oh, really? Okay.
Let's talk about it. Well, we should say what it is. So basically, like, Fone says, hey, Thorn, where are we going? Down to the springs. Oh, Phone Bone, you're going to love the festival, yada, yada, yada. And it says, and we got to, we're not getting water. We're taking a bath. And Phone says, bath? What kind of bath? And you don't see Thorn. And then you see sort of some of her clothes on the ground. Oh, my gosh. And then he like, and they go and it's all off screen, but they're taking a bath. Says, Phone Bone, could you be a little more careful with the soap? Silence. What? The soap, silly. You just ate the whole bar, which is a great joke. But this is just such a strange scene to me because, like, even if Thorn, like, I know Thorn is very rustic and all, but, like, even if Thorn is not aware that Phone has a huge crush on her, and, like, yeah, Phone is, like, a weird cartoony character that doesn't look like a human, but it's still very weird to be, like, taking a bath, possibly naked with him there. I just, like, I always... literally, like, in the whole 1,000+ page graphic novel, these are the only 2 pages where I'm just like, why is this here?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think there is kind of this I think especially early in Thorn, like one of the things that Smith was doing was getting her to like there was this long running gag in the original Thorn strips of where like she was going to take off her shirt. So there's a lot more kind of like sexualized element early on to her that I think by the time it gets here, it's pretty much gone. But this seems to kind of maybe be trading in that a little bit. Yeah, it is. I don't know. I've never really actually thought about it other than it's funny that he eats the bar of soap because he's so
Oh no, that gag
discombobulated
is great.
by what's going on.
But it's just so
Yeah.
strange, sort of character wise, that like, because Thorn isn't stupid, and she's presumably not
Right.
like even if she's unaware how pretty she is or how much Phone likes her, like it's just very strange. And I mean, I get like maybe these things were more common in like rustic areas in the Middle Ages or something, and so that's what he's trying to evoke, sort of like kind of the simplicity of the
Yeah.
like medieval, I don't know, versus the like,
Right.
but I don't know that seems just always.
Grandma Ben needs to have a talk with Thorn.
Yeah, it just
Like,
seems very
hey,
strange.
look, that was very inappropriate what you did.
Yeah. um, so Phoney has sort of run off to try and make his fortune. He's headed to Barralhaven in hopes of making lots of money off of bookkeeping for the Great Cow Race. And he stumbles upon these rat creatures, realizes somebody's coming, and then hides. And there's just this great scene. Now, this is the first time we see King Doc, right?
Yeah.
So King Doc
Love
is
King
sort
Doc.
of, what'd you say?
I love King Doc. He's a great character design. I think he gets a lot better looking, even as the Smith kind of changes his design slightly. And yeah, he becomes even creepier looking.
Yeah, because the rat creatures, right? The two rat creatures we've seen up to this point are these sort of mainly comedic, like they are threatening, but they're mainly sort of there for comic effect. King
Yeah.
Doc is not a comedic figure. He's this giant sort of king of the rat creatures, extremely powerful, really frightening, massive teeth,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of tells the two rat creatures that they need to come to this sort of meeting.
Yeah. I do like this sequence. There is something about Phoney running into the group of people that are hunting him and just being like, and walking off and like they totally miss him.
Yeah.
Because as we find out, Phoney has he's a very lucky character in the sense that he kind of gets away with certain things that he really shouldn't. Unfortunately, this kind of delays like his comeuppance and it makes him, kind of get into deeper trouble. But
Yeah.
I think there's something kind of funny about that.
Yeah. And so then Grandma Ben tells Phone that, so they realize Phoney's gone, they can't find him. And Grandma Ben says, like, after having the gitchy feeling, Phone, don't sleep in the barn like normal tonight. Come in and sleep in the house. Yeah. And we move to just this amazing scene. I think I've mentioned this before, but I think Smith's night scenes are just like, they're so visually striking. And the night scenes are a big part of why I always tell people don't get the color edition, find a black and white. Like just the stark night and moon over the mountains, and then you come in and you realize you can't even see most of the rat creatures. You can just see the torches that some of them are holding, and you realize there are hundreds, if not thousands, of these all together. And we're introduced to the creepiest character, I think, in the whole series, the Hooded One, who is kind of reminiscent, I think, of the Black Riders. I think as we go on in the series, this character, the Hooded One, is very distinct from that influence, if there's an influence there. And I just, one of the things as a kid, particularly reading it, just fascinated me was the way that everyone else's speech bubbles, right, go to their mouths, right? Where else would they go? The Hooded One, right? You don't see a face or anything. The speech bubble points into the hood.
Yeah.
And it just like that.
Yeah, they're almost like little umbilical cords going into, Yeah. It is. It's very effective. Yeah. And it's subtle, but it's great.
Yeah. And I mean, for me at least, it fired my imagination. Like, what is going on under there? Why is like I just imagine the sound being different, because we haven't really touched on Smith's lettering style. I believe he does all the lettering himself. And he's quite a good letterer. He has, he'll sort of make certain things more, he draws more attention to this. He
Yeah.
bolds a lot of words, but the hooded one is the first character we've met who just consistently has this different lettering style that just is like,
Mm.
the lettering style for all the other characters is, for want of a better word, a bit cartoony.
Yeah.
And the hooded one, it's just a bit starker.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
It's
you know
yeah.
more about this than I do. You could probably speak better, but it always creeped me out a little bit, and especially the combination of the lettering style with the speech bubble sort of going into the hood.
Yeah, it's definitely rougher and smaller, so it communicates that the hooded one is speaking in a whisper, or a lower voice at least. So it is interesting. I'd have to look at it's a slightly different font. Yeah, you're right. It's more ragged, and the speech bubble itself is more ragged. So he's
Yeah.
doing a lot of little subtle things to communicate there that are really effective.
And it seems like when the rat creatures are like, the rat creatures' speech bubbles are a little bit more sort of ragged, as you say, right? Like a bit less
Yeah.
balloony all the time, right? But then when they're talking with the hooded ones, theirs get more like the hooded ones. And
Yeah.
also, something that I hadn't noticed before is Smith will sometimes have the hooded one's speech bubble be a lot larger than it needs to be. And
Yeah.
it's not like someone is speaking loudly, right? It's not like you've got a big speech
Yeah.
bubble with really big letters. It's still these small letters, but you get this big chunk of white that
Yeah.
draws attention to it, right? In the way that, like, sometimes when you hear someone who's a really effective communicator, as they get quieter, you pay more
Mm-hmm.
attention. Right? And doing
Right.
that sort of visually is really impressive, I think.
That was the Joe Biden method, right? You shout and then you whisper.
And then there's this brief, strange kind of dream, like one-page dream sequence. And dream sequences are going to
Mm-hmm.
be important over the course of Bone. So there's this little girl who, Thorn is having this dream, this little girl. They're coming, run. What about the courtyard? They've gone to join them in the walls. Fill every vessel with water. The village lost. The gate cannot hold much longer. Only what you can carry. They've entered the courtyard. Hurry, take the child. And it's just this dark, you see these shadows. You don't see what's around the young Thorn. There's just this creepy, I don't know.
Yeah.
That, like, the dream sequences always strike me. And
Yeah. This is just and we've talked a lot about how I'd say Smith is very conservative with his camera angles and his panel layouts, but he kind of he's breaking panels here in ways that he doesn't usually do. I think to communicate that there's a dream, but there's like multiple scenes layered on top of each other. It's really artistically effective.
yeah.
And it's just zooming in on Thorne's face. And then in the background, you see eyes getting closer and closer in the panels it's overlaid on. And finally, the faces of rat creatures approaching. It's really, man, it's very creative. It reads still just as easily.
Yeah.
It tells you that this is something of a dream. And then in the next page, we're back to kind of the normal layouts that I'll do. But yeah, it's a good clue. Really, yeah, visually impressive.
Yeah. And then Thorn wakes up covered in sweat, says she had the worst dream, and the rat creatures were attacking, and Fone says it's no dream, it's happening. The rat creatures surrounded the farm. Hurry, Grim and Ben's waiting for us downstairs. And that's the end of the issue.
Yeah.
And I think the first 3 issues are great. They set up so much.
Yeah.
We talked about them for 2 whole episodes. And like, I know Jeff Smith published Bone independently, and a big part of how he realized the people who are going to be selling my comics are comic book shops, right? The people who run comic book shops. So I need to be selling my work to them, not to the readers. Because if I sell it to them, then they'll sell it to the readers, right? They'll buy more and they'll talk it up to people in the shops, and there will be more getting sold. So he took the first 3 issues and was like, brought them to some Comic Con. It might have been San Diego, I don't know. And was, I think, like, giving them out to comic book shop owners. Actually, this was how he met Dave Sim, who did Cerebus, which I want us to cover sometimes. It's a really interesting comic, but he gave him the first 3 issues, and sort of the first 3 issues grabbed a lot of people. I think
Yeah.
Neil Gaiman spoke about, like, sort of reading the beginning of it beginning of Bone and just being hooked, but then being pulled into this much bigger story. And I think the end of issue 4 is really where the story starts to become tense, and you start to have these, right? Like if this were coming out, I think it was every other month at the time, and I read that, like, I want to buy the next issue. And this is really where that starts, where you start having these great, really effective cliffhangers.
Yeah. It is. It's fantastic. And the next issue doesn't really slow down either. So we're on to Barralhaven. Do you want to read the recap of Barralhaven?
So the farm is under attack, but Grandma Ben, despite being this sort of sweet old lady, is tougher than she appears and is taking on rat creatures single-handedly, no weapons, and tells Fone and Thorn to run. They rush for the dark woods, realizing that they underestimated how many rat creatures there were, right? Because it's not just a few in their house. They're surrounded. They're eventually cornered by rat creature troops. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the very untense scene with Phoney having gotten to the village and the local pub, the Barralhaven, which is a great name for a pub, where he finds who working as a bartender, but Smiley Bone. He's back.
Yeah.
Reunited with his cousin, he lets him in on his bookmaking scheme, informing Smiley that Smiley's going to have to wear a cow suit. Smiley's very happy about this. Unfortunately, Phoney runs up a tab without realizing that they don't accept money at the Barralhaven, and gets on the wrong side of the tavern owner, Lucius Down. Instead, they accept eggs.
Yep.
And Phoney is not impressed with this. Then we shift back to the forest, and Fone and Thorn are rescued by the red dragon, who was introduced in an earlier issue. The dragon takes them back to the farm to look for their grandma. I don't actually have a ton to say about this issue, in part just because it, like, the action is so well done that it's sort of hard for me to explain why it's so effective. Like, that's just like my eyes just move from panel to panel in a way that, like, makes it just feel effortless. Smith, already this early in this great comic, has basically mastered. Remind me, what's that term for the sort of motion between the panels?
We talked about it in
the Understanding Comics episode.
Yeah, like continuation or something like that. Yeah,
but he just has the sort of pacing, the way that and he has this sort of with comedic stuff. We already know the action is just so effective. You have these single shots of the characters in motion with little to no dialogue for whole pages, and you're not in the least confused. At least I'm not, about anything that's happening.
I mean, and you commented on it in the last issue too about the night scenes, but I think this is just another, like, all my favorite sequences in Bone happen at night, and I think this is where you really, as we saw before, but here too, you see him start to really just make very effective use of the blacks and the darkness. Characters are moving in and out of shadows. There's a lot of people are obscured. Things are in silhouette for a lot of the time. And it really gives a lot of depth, and it just makes it so much more dynamic. And, this is something that I think he'll even get better at. There's certain sequences that happen at night in the forest that are just like, oh my gosh, visually, this is so incredible. I think of, like, the Eye of the Storm with, like, rain and lightning and stuff. So he does this a lot, where it feels like, the characters get thrown out into the woods and it's at nighttime, and man, I just love it. It's like, so I'm always like, my favorite, some of my favorite bits of his art. So it's a very welcome to have kind of the first running through the woods at night sequence happening here. Yeah.
And there's this one, even though things are getting more serious, there is this one great comedic moment on the one volume for me. It's page 112 and 113. Yeah. There's this series of 4 panels where, Thorn has just sort of put her finger to her lips to tell Fone to shush. And they go around a tree, and they're face to face with a rat creature, and all 3 of them are just completely dead-faced, right? It's the exact moment when they've come upon each other. None of the 3 of them have reacted. And then all 3 of them scream out, "Ah!" and make these sort of shocked faces. Thorn then picks up Phone and basically uses him to headbutt the rat creature. And the
Yeah.
rat creature is then with a big bonk. And then in the next panel, the rat creature is knocked out and Phone says, "Hey," she says, "Sorry, it was a reflex." And that sort of just series of four, like it's frightening and then it's hilarious. And then
Yeah.
with the next panel, you're immediately back to frightening and
Right.
running off from them and getting surrounded. I just think that,
Yep.
yeah, reading through this time, I'm just so aware of how masterfully Smith uses the moments between panels and just selects, like, he's got the scene in his head, he knows what happens, and he just selects, okay, this is exactly what I need to draw here, so that
Yeah.
the reader follows and has the right reaction.
Yeah. Moving on to when we get to the Barralhaven and Smiley and Phoney. I've talked a lot about how I love the interactions between Fone and Phoney Bone, but I think Smiley and Phoney are kind of my favorite duo. Smiley as a kind of comedic character, I think works incredibly well, more than usually a comedic character does, at least for me, because he's like this perfect combination of like stupid and innocent and good natured, and like he gets involved in these really underhanded bad schemes of Phonies just to do like wear a cow suit. You know, he has no greed apparently. He doesn't seem to care at all about money,
Yeah.
but like the whole motivation for him is just to be able to like wear a cow suit. I don't know. I just the way he's drawn and kind of their interactions always. I just like the second he shows up, like the story gets better for me.
I love Smiley. I always miss him in the issues two and three. I'm sort of
Yeah.
like, I feel like he's just gone forever, and I want him there. Yeah. Um.
Yep.
So Dragon comes back and saves him. There's this great sort of comedic series where Phone smells the dragon, the sort of brimstone of the dragon first, and he says, "Oh, you guys are gonna run, like you're gonna be,
Yeah.
he's here, he's gonna put your fur on fire, just shoo." And rat creature, "I smell nothing. What are you talking about? You don't smell brimstone?" "Oh, that's weird. I don't smell it anymore either." And then rat creature goes to eat Phone, and then you've got the red dragon and Ted the bug, who I love,
Yeah.
there, and he saves him. And there's this great sort of action scene of Thorn and Phone riding the great red dragon back to the house, and then they arrive and Thorn says, "We're too late," and we see the farm basically sort of not destroyed but on fire and not in good
Yeah.
shape. And
Yeah.
that's the end of issue 5. Any comments on
Yeah.
5 before we turn to 6?
Not really, other than yeah, we can see where we have another cliffhanger here. But yeah, let's keep going on to issue 6.
All right,
Phony's Inferno.
if you want to summarize this one.
So the dragon, Thorn, and Phone, they return to the farm to find Grandma Ben really none the worse for wear. I'm kind of dismissing their concerns and letting them know she fought rat creatures back in the big war. Her cheerful attitude vanishes, though, when she sees that the dragon with them, and it's clear they have a history. As soon as the dragon leaves, she won't talk about it anymore. She tells Thorn and Phone that it's time to get ready for the spring fair, and she's back to her cheerful, chipper self. But when she's alone, when Grandma Ben's alone with Phone, she questions him as to why the rat creatures are looking for him. Phone insists that he has no idea and unfolds the unfortunate history of him and his cousins and why they were run out of Boneville. Back in the village, Phoney and Smiley are working off their debts in the Barralhaven Tavern. Phoney unveils his plan to Smiley to fix the cow race with something he calls the mystery cow. He already has Smiley spreading rumors around town that Grandma Ben is too old to win the cow race. But when he's alone, he has an unsettling encounter with the Hooded One, who informs him that they have unfinished business. And it seems that only he can see the hooded figure. And meanwhile, Grandma Ben, Thorn, and Phone reach the village. Phone and Thorn's friendship is deepening, much to Phone's delight. Lucius Down greets Grandma Ben warmly, and it appears they also might have a history. Smiley greets Phone, and the cousins are finally reunited after being separated since the first issue. They're also being watched by the hooded figure. So this really does feel like the end of kind of like part 1, almost, even though it's not part 1. But there's, we've been going on cliffhanger, and now this kind of feels like, okay, take a breath, end of this chapter, sort of.
Yeah.
But yeah, what are your thoughts on Phoney's Inferno? Interesting
The thing
reference
that
to
strikes me
Dante's
is how
Inferno.
much happens in a single issue, because they're relatively small,
Yeah.
short issues. What are they, like 20 2 pages or something usually, or
Right.
maybe it's slightly longer, but it's not. I don't know. Just so much happens without it ever feeling rushed, for me at least.
Mm-hmm.
So that scene, for plot reasons, I just want to call attention to that scene between the dragon and Grandma Ben,
Yeah.
where they just clearly have a history, and Thorn is just sort of a real dragon, Grandma. Look, I can see. Hello, dragon. Hello, Rose. It's been a while. Yep. They stare at each other. Well, looks like everything's under control here. Guess I'll be going. Yep. Stare at each other. Come on, Ted. And the dragon and Ted head off.
Yeah.
That scene, it's sort of striking, and also it's something we'll put a pin in for future episodes.
Well, we talked about this before, right? Where Smith will drop little kind of breadcrumbs about, things that'll kind of make your Doctor Who style, your imagination say, oh, what's that about? To me, there's a couple things in here that I'm like, oh, this feels very Star Wars. Like, I fought with your father back in the Clone Wars. And you're like, the
I was
Clone
thinking
Wars?
that too.
Yeah, there's these little references like, oh, what is that? What is that about? We never really know, So she talks about fighting rats back in the big wars. Clearly, there's a history with the dragon that she's not pleased about.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there's it's good storytelling because it's just kind of tantalizing you. It's letting you know there's bigger things afoot than just kind of the more scaled down concerns of the main characters at this point.
Yeah. The other scene that gets me is page 136 and 137. I'm just going to read this. It's a little long, but I just have to read this dialogue on the chance that anybody listening has not read this comic, or just to remind those who do how great this bit is. So Fone is talking about how they got run out of Bone. Phoney invited everybody in town, and he promised free food for anyone who showed up. Pretty soon, the picnic was the talk of Boneville. Then the big day arrived, and the whole town turned out. The kids were playing under the trees, and the women wore sunbonnets and fancy dresses. The picnic was off to a perfect start. There's a statue in the park of Boneville's founder, Big Johnson Bone. And since my cousins and I are descendants of his, Phoney wanted to make his announcement in front of the statue. And just to add to the festivities, Phoney had a 50-foot balloon made of himself. The balloon was tied to old Big Johnson. Fasten that end there, would you, Bone? Everything was going great. Folks were listening to the firehouse band and enjoying the sunshine. The food was passed out, and there were plenty of prune tarts for everyone. Prune tarts? And as they're talking, they're sort of getting the cows and the cart ready for them to head to town.
Cart.
Yeah, Phoney. He got a good deal on some prunes from a discount prune broker. Of course. So anyway, makes the announcement, right? He gets up and declares his candidacy for mayor of Boneville. I still think that's when they should have run him out, says Grandma Ben. That's when a gust of wind came off the river and pulled the balloon loose. The statue came off its base and was dangling off the balloon ankle. All of a sudden, this giant inflatable Phoney Bone started moving toward the crowd. Oh my. Yeah, it was amazing. My first grade teacher, Miss Crabbone, was first to panic. She started screaming and running back and forth. The balloon chased her into the river before Smiley and I could let the air out of it. It was awful. Everyone was stunned. At first, nobody moved. They just sat there with this look of horror on their faces. And that's when they ran you out of town. No, that's when the bad prunes kicked in.
Yeah, that's a great story.
That bit I love that. And it also, as we'll see, is giving sort of crucial background information, but in this sort of seemingly purely comic scene.
Yeah.
And that I think is something I don't mean to harp on Doctor Who, but something that one of my favorite Doctor Who writers, Stephen Moffat, does really well is he'll have a really good comedic scene that you don't think is going to be important, but gives you a piece or two of information that will be key to the sort of working out of the plot. And so, right, like you read this and you remember because it's hilarious, and then some stuff from that is going to come back in the future. That's all I'll say for those who are reading along and haven't read further.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So we are now back to, as we cut from that scene back to the Barralhaven, where Smiley and Phoney are basically pressed into service, working because they ran up a tab without being able to pay for it. So they're washing dishes. One person we didn't really comment on that is a very important character who was introduced last time around, but you don't realize he's an important character quite yet, I think, is Lucius Down, kind of the owner of the Barralhaven Tavern, who kind of looks like almost like a pro wrestler physique of some sort. Big hulking guy.
Yeah.
Very gruff. Not a huge fan of the Phoney or Smiley, but as we see, has a very sweet, gentle side, especially when Rose and maybe Thorn, is much more just kind of a softie. From the first time I've read this, Lucius has always reminded me of my dad. Not that my dad's a big hulking grouch or anything like that, but specifically his relationship with my cousins. I had some cousins who were, my dad is an incredibly sweet, probably one of, if you ask most people, one of the sweetest people, but often exasperated with my younger cousins to the point where it was always like this constant battle between how much they could annoy each other. So the relationship between Lucius and Phoney and Smiley, if Zach and Walker happen to be listening to this, this has always reminded me of you and my dad. But anyway, yeah, I love their dynamic overall. He's clearly a very good guy, exasperated by some very trying personalities that he has to kind of work with. But what do you think of Lucius?
Yeah, Lucius is a character who really grew on me as I read it. He does sort of start out kind of in the background and has a much more prominent role as things continue. And we haven't seen a lot of him yet, so I don't want to say too much, but he's really good in his comedic moments, and he's great in his forthcoming other moments. I really like the little hint of page 147 when they first get there of how kind of sweet Lucius is to Grandma Ben.
Yeah.
Hello, Lucius. How you doing, Rosie? Calls her Rosie. Was the road safe? I was worried about you, and just asking after, and he'd picked a flower for her, and it's just sweet. I don't know.
Yeah. They have similar character designs in that I know we've commented before on, I think Smith is at his strongest when he's doing more exaggerated kind of cartooning. And I think both Grandma Ben and Lucius kind of fall into that range of if Thorn is kind of the least cartoony character in the book, and maybe the Bones are the most, then Grandma Ben and Lucius are definitely somewhere in the middle, I'd say. And I think they have Lucius's character design in particular is very strong to me. And, physically he looks very strong, but also just it's a good one. He's very memorable.
Yeah. Anything else on sort of this chapter that you want to call attention to?
The encounter with the hooded one is interesting. Phoney's encounter. This issue is called Phoney's Inferno. So I think it's kind of the implication being that, Phoney might be in bigger trouble than you think, other than just having to wash dishes. He's gotten the attention of, from what we can understand, kind of the villains, the dark forces lurking in the background. And we don't know why, but they're after him. The language is vague, but that there's the transaction that needs to happen with Phoney. And so, we don't know what's going on. He doesn't really seem to know what's going on. But Phoney is in deeper trouble than he realizes.
Yeah.
But no, really nothing else. This is a good, this is the end of book 1 out of Boneville. So it's, as far as a series goes, it's a pretty strong opening.
Yeah, I remember, I think I said this before, but taking the first volume out from the library when I was, 10, 12, maybe I was slightly old now that I'm thinking, because I think the last one came out in 2009, right? I want to say.
Was it that late? Yeah. I thought it was earlier for some reason.
Had not yet come out when I started reading them, but by the time I got to it, it had. So I guess I was probably like 13, 14 when I started. And I just remember reading through the first one, devouring it, and just wanting to keep reading. It really does. It's funny because what it's doing is much smaller than what Bone is going to be, sort of attempting, and I think attempting quite successfully over the course of its run. But it just does everything so well, and in ways that kind of pull readers in to the characters and the comedy and some of the developing drama. Yeah, there's a reason that I... Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it is interesting, I think, when you look at the ending of this chapter, we really have all the major players introduced that'll take us all the way to the end, which is kind of remarkable for how much more there is to go, and how much of the plot there is that, these are really the people who the whole story revolves around. Grandma Ben, Lucius, the Red Dragon, obviously, and the villains and everything.
Yeah.
It's much more of a, like, all the pieces are here, and these are who are going to be with us for the rest of the time. So I think that's kind of one of the reasons it's such a great start, is because it's not really, even though it's taking its time, it's not wasting your time by introducing people that'll just kind of get thrown to the side, you know what I mean? Or like abandoned as he moves the plot into a different direction. So, I think that's one of the pleasures of reading Bone, is that it always has a momentum, even when it's like slow and when he pauses for, more comedic sequences. There is it doesn't just feel episodic or like a series of vignettes without a larger plot. Like, everything it's slowly building, but it's definitely got its own momentum that is just a delight. So yeah, it's really remarkable on that front. Yeah.
Yeah. Before we close out, Levi, do you want to mention your Kickstarter that everyone should go support?
Oh, sure. I'm doing a Kickstarter. I have some stretch goals that I'm trying to go for. So even if it is funded, I would love your support so we can get to our stretch goals. But if you go to Kickstarter.com and search for Open Your Eyes, the first issue of my comic is up there. It's 72 pages, and hopefully, and you can get the print version and even get some cool upgrades if you're interested.
He says issue. I mean, it's almost like a volume. Like, there's a lot to it. And I think I've said this before on the podcast, but it really is a great comic, and you can go check it out online too first if you're hesitant. Highly recommend. So with all that said, next week we will be reading the first year of Prince Valiant strips, available from Fantagraphics, which is gorgeous volumes, 2 years in each one. Huge, beautiful. They're like a little pricey. I think they're like $35 a pop, but I highly recommend just like dropping the money on the box set, which a lot of time you can get on Amazon for like 60. It gives you the first 6 years and like phenomenal comics. Anyway, so that's what we'll be talking about.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned this, but we will have a special guest, Jordan Holt, the cartoonist behind the Theseus books.
And I would just mention, we already recorded that episode. So if someone has not read Prince Valiant, it's a very accessible episode, and we have some, I think, really interesting conversations. So if you've been enjoying us, even if you're hesitant about jumping into Prince Valiant, just listen to it even if you haven't read Prince Valiant when it comes out. Jordan just brings a lot to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've enjoyed this episode of Truth Beauty Comics, there are 3 things you can do for the podcast to support it. The first is to just keep listening and tell your friends about the podcast.
The second is to review the podcast, giving it 5 stars wherever you listen to it. The last thing you can do is consider contributing to our Patreon with a monthly donation. For as little as $3 a month, you can get perks like access to exclusive episodes, voting on upcoming episodes, and even an original drawing from Levi. But most of all, you can help make this podcast sustainable.
That's the end of the episode. You can reach us at truthbeautycomics@gmail.com or on our social media accounts. Thanks for listening, and remember to take comics seriously and have fun while doing it.